Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
This Sunday, it's not over. One of the most expensive political rivalries in Georgia history moves on to the next stage. Runoff races are now set in our state's nationally watched midterm primary elections. Good Sunday morning. I'm Rick Fulbaum.
And I'm Doug Reardon. The contests for many of Georgia's top offices are now entering overtime, including the race for governor. Next month, Republican voters will have to choose between Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and billionaire healthcare executive Rick Jackson in their primary runoff for governor. The two candidates now go head-to-head on June 16th after neither one of them secured a majority of the vote on election night. It means the multi-million-dollar messaging battle you've been seeing play out in television ads, social media posts, and campaign mailers will carry on for another 3 weeks. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones is the Trump-endorsed candidate in this race, and his opponent, billionaire Rick Jackson, has worked through his more than $80 million ad buys to frame himself as a political outsider like President Trump. Now, Jones did get the most Republican votes on Tuesday night, and he said that it was proof that Rick Jackson can't buy the Georgia governor's mansion.
I think Georgia just spoke, y'all. And they spoke loud and clear that Georgia's not for sale. It's not for sale. We've had over $100 million spent against us. Most of them are attack ads on myself, my family, just whatever they could make up. But I'm so proud of Georgia voters for realizing that Hollywood production over there is nothing like the genuine article that you have right here.
And Jones has already challenged Rick Jackson to another televised debate ahead of that runoff in June.
When we asked Rick Jackson about that, he said he's happy to debate anytime. Atlanta News First contacted Burt Jones and Rick Jackson about a debate. Jones offered June 1st, while Jackson countered with the 14th. Atlanta News First offered a compromise date of June 7th or 8th. Jackson remained firm on the 14th. Atlanta News First General Manager Eric Schrader released a statement on the potential debate, saying in part, quote, Atlanta News First and Gray would look forward to hosting a debate between the two candidates on any mutually agreed upon date. Jackson told us he's energized after making the runoff and said during the sprint to the finish line, he'll focus on pulling voters who cast their ballots for Burt Jones over to his side. Jackson also plans to try to turn out Georgians who didn't vote in the primary by emphasizing his push to bring down costs using pro-business solutions.
We don't have really political problems in Georgia. We got business problems, higher taxes, property taxes have gone insane. We got affordability issues, healthcare costs are really high, and so those require business solutions, not political solutions. And so those are the things that I bring. I think I can bring. Just like President Trump is doing a lot of business things for the United States, I'll bring that.
Whoever wins that runoff will face former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms on the general election ballot in November. Bottoms cruised to victory on election night, pulling in more than 56% of the vote, even with 6 other opponents on the Democratic primary ballot. Now that she's passed the primaries, Bottoms says she is focused on kitchen table issues, like helping lower Georgians' health care costs by expanding Medicaid and improving education outcomes by fully funding public schools and raising teacher pay. Former Mayor Bottoms has already endured some attacks from her primary opponents, including former State Senator Jason Estevez and from Rick Jackson, one of her potential general election opponents, who both took aim at Bottoms over the surge in violent crime that occurred when she was in office. The former mayor told us she is ready for the new attack ads, now sure to come her way in the run-up to November.
I'm not concerned at all. I mean, I've heard the narrative. A lot of it's false. I know it's going to come up. It didn't work for Jason in the primary, so I don't expect that it's going to work for Republicans in November. Politics is a full contact sport. So if you don't want to get hit and you can't take a punch, then you probably shouldn't get in the ring.
If elected, Bottoms would be the first African-American, first woman, and first Atlanta mayor to win the governorship. She would also be the first Democrat elected to Georgia's governor's mansion in nearly 30 years. Georgia Democrats are lining up behind Bottoms.
And that includes Senator Jon Ossoff, who has also secured his spot on the general election ballot. He had a very easy election night, in fact, running unopposed on the primary ballots as he worked to defend his seat for the first time since being elected in 2021. But the Republican Party pushed to unseat Ossoff. That remains unsettled as Congressman Mike Collins and former college football coach Derek Dooley advanced to a runoff. Collins came in first place on election night with about a 10-point lead over Dooley, the first-term congressman, pulling in about 40% of that vote. But some new polling from Qantas Insights shows Collins with 54% of likely GOP voters and Dooley with 37%. On election night, Collins told us why he thinks Georgia needs new representation in the U.S. Senate.
We've sent so much good legislation over to that Senate, and they just don't pick it up. And it's not because we don't have enough Republicans over there, but it's sometimes we don't always have the right Republicans over there. And I want to make sure that we get the right Republican over there in Georgia so that we've got Trump's back and we can continue to push this America First agenda that is changing the trajectory of this country and getting us back on track.
And right now, neither of these candidates, it's worth noting, in Georgia's U.S. Senate race on the GOP side has an endorsement from President Trump. But Governor Brian Kemp has backed Derek Dooley since he launched his campaign last fall, even traveling across the state and campaigning with his longtime friend. With 3 weeks left to make an impact, Dooley told me there is still a lot of work to do.
There is a massive amount of voters around the state where we haven't spent a dime to reach. The coast is a great example, a lot of South Georgia. And so our goal is just going to continue to reach those voters. I am not like the rest of these politicians. I think Congress is not working the way it should be, and I think we need reforms. And I'm going up there to serve you. I'm not going up there for some long political career or to get rich.
And Ossoff also weighed in on the Republican race for his seat. His campaign told us in a statement, quote, Trump puppets Collins and Dooley have made themselves terminally inseparable from the toxic president. They went on to say, meanwhile, the juggernaut Ossoff campaign, she goes on to say, will continue building insurmountable momentum to win decisively in November.
And let's welcome in our panel, Democratic political fundraiser, principal of Public Service Partners, Keisha Carter, former Cobb County GOP Chair Jason Shepard, and political science professor and A&F political analyst Dr. Ben Taylor. Thank you all for being here, going on the record. Keisha, let me start with you. We'll talk about the former Atlanta mayor who had a big victory the other night. What do you think she's saying that is so resonating with voters?
Well, I've got to love it. Her first name's Keisha. So, it's always, she'd be the first Keisha governor that out there. I'm a little biased in that. But I think what really resonated for her is that she does have a proven record because she has been a mayor before. And so she served in an executive position. But the one thing I think Mayor Bottoms has done really well is really tell her story very well that lets people know how she relates to the everyday struggles that everyone's dealing with, the kitchen table issues that she talked about, how we're going to pay these bills, how am I going to meet my mortgage, how am I going to afford health care, not only for myself, but also for my aging parents and for my family. And I think that just really resonated with voters. And I think, unfortunately, the rest of the field didn't do a great job differentiating themselves from anything that she was talking about. I think they were so busy kind of hitting each other, they didn't really go after her. And so it made it a lot easier for her to cruise in and get her message across to voters.
And Jason, let's take you to the GOP side of the ballot. Now, we did not see outright wins in two of these marquee races for Senate or for governor. What does that say about the candidates and the way that maybe GOP voters are feeling about them?
I think, and we talked about on this show a couple of weeks ago, there's such a large number of undecideds going into both these races that I think all the candidates, kind of like the second place finishers in the Democrat primary, were looking for that breakout moment that never happened. Even with the Trump endorsement for Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, that was not enough to help him pull away from the pack. He came in first, but still very close to Rick Jackson. So they have 3 more weeks to try to tell Georgia Republican voters why they should be the nominee, why they're the best candidate to take on either John Ossoff or Mayor Bottoms in the general election. And interesting to see if they can consolidate the support of their opponents who did not make the runoff and keep their own voters and get them back out to vote. Yeah.
Ben, let's talk about these Republican runoffs that we're about to see in these 2 marquee races. Jackson coming in second, Dooley coming in second. What does history tell us about second place finishers that then force a runoff election?
Well, that's a great question. And so Georgia uses runoff elections to decide winners. You have to get 50% of the vote. And since 2006, in primary elections, we've had about 20 statewide runoffs. And in those, about 30% of the time, the second place finisher comes back to win. So that's not like a coin flip. Like you'd rather be the first place finisher, but it also demonstrates that with the right mix of maybe consolidation of the other field of the voters, as well as getting your own base voters back out, that you can come back from that second place and you can win the nomination.
Yeah, real quick, let's talk fundraising. I want to ask both of you this because, Keisha, you're a fundraiser by trade. Now, we know Ossoff has a huge war chest going into this. Same thing with Keisha Lance Bottoms. Is that going to matter to them in the coming weeks? Certainly, they don't have to worry about a runoff, but as we gear up for this general election, how important is that going to be?
I think if we've learned anything, this can be a very expensive election. And I know I've received probably 4 text messages since the polls closed, and we knew who the winners were on the Democratic side, just saying, hey, chip in this, chip in that. So yes, you use this time to continue to gather more and more money and momentum. The last governor's race, we saw it over 100 million. I know this one's going to surpass that. We've just seen that already in the Republican primary. So we're expecting a lot of money to be taken, but we know this is a national race. And so for Senator Ossoff, he's going to continue to raise gangbusters. I think he's still number 1 on the FEC side. And then for Mayor Bottoms, she has to do the same in order to stay competitive.
Is there something to be said, too, for, the messaging that money will buy you, right? We saw Mike Collins. He actually had some of the lower fundraising totals out of that U.S. Senate race on the GOP side, and he ended up getting the most votes.
Well, that's right. Well, and part of it's the fact that Congressman Collins is a congressman from the edge of the Atlanta metro area. So he has a little bit higher name ID, and that's what the fundraising is about. It's about raising the name ID and getting the message out. But it's also about investing in a candidate. You've looked in past races, and I think especially with Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp, we're both raised a tremendous amount of money for the races. But if you look at the percentages, Governor Kemp raised more of his money from inside Georgia and Stacey Abrams from outside. So when someone who's an actual voter invests in, they tell their friends, they tell their family, go and vote. I've given money to this person. So more so than the amount of money raised is where it's coming from.
All right, when we come back, next on the record, Georgia's Supreme Court justices get another term after fending off 2 challengers backed by the Democrats.
Happening now, the November ballot is set in the race to replace late Congressman David Scott in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Voters in Georgia's 13th congressional district handed State Representative Jasmine Clark a major victory on election night. She raked in about 56% of the vote share, even with 5 other Democrats on the primary ballot. Clark will now face off against Jonathan Chavez in the November general election. He is the lone Republican who qualified for the race in that heavily Democratic district. Well, right now the field is completely set in the race for Georgia Attorney General. 2 state legislators are on the ballot fighting to be Georgia's top law enforcement officer. On the Republican side, it's State Senator Brian Strickland. And for the Democrats, it's State Representative Tanya Miller. Tuesday was the general election for Georgia's nonpartisan judicial races.
Yeah, those posts, we should say, are typically nonpartisan, but 8 of the 9 justices on the state Supreme Court were appointed by Republican governors. And certainly, if you've seen the ads, you know that we are moving away from that nonpartisan label. 2 challengers ran on messaging that was clearly aimed at Democratic voters. There was hope within the party that strong Democratic turnout could produce the first defeat of a sitting justice. No joke, since 1922.
But that streak continues. Presiding Justice Sarah Warren won over Democrat-supported former State Senator Jen Jordan. Warren's victory came early on election night as she pulled in support from nearly 60% of voters. In the other closely watched Supreme Court race, Justice Charlie Bethel defeated Democrat-supported Miracle Rankin by just a few percentage points. The difference in results came as a surprise as Jordan and Rankin launched their campaigns to the High Court together and ran as a quasi-ticket, even appearing in TV ads together.
All right, back with our panel now. Keisha, let's start with you because this was a big swing for Democrats. They poured a lot of money into this race. Why did they feel it was important to try and win these seats?
Well, I think it's important that our courts here in Georgia are supposed to be elected. And I think that I commend the Democratic Party for actually stepping up and saying, we're going to get involved in this and this matters. And so that is what they did. It was a big coalition that came together to make this thing happen. And we didn't quite get the result that we wanted. But I think what's important is that we started to get in places that we should have been involved in the first place. And this is the first swing at it. I don't think it'll be the last. And we've got to continue to play in places where we haven't typically been involved to make sure that our values and our voices are being heard.
Jason, from the Republican perspective, these nonpartisan races and the results that we saw the other night, what do they mean for Georgia voters?
I think we want a judiciary that's not based on partisanship. I mean, the Republican Party tried to do this more than 2 decades ago in 2004, trying to unseat Justices Leah Ward Sears and Carol Hunstein, and the same result. The Republican Party put a lot of money in. I was vice chair of the party at the time, and to really make these nonpartisan seats partisan. I find a little bit ironic the Democrats are complaining about certain elected positions in metro area counties now going nonpartisan and planning on suing while trying to make nonpartisan races inherently partisan. I think the message was sent that Georgia voters want a judiciary that decides things on the law, not by R or D.
Keisha, what about some of these other contests? Of course, we have the House races that we've been talking about, the Attorney General races where the field is set. We know who's going to be facing whom in November. Are the Democrats well positioned to win these contests?
Well, I think we're going to have a very strong ticket. We've got a couple of runoffs on our side, even on the statewide side, but I think Tanya Miller specifically, excellent attorney, former prosecutor, civil rights attorney, state legislator. It's going to be good to have someone that's actually been in a courtroom that could actually be our attorney general for once. So I'll be excited to watch her race along with some of the others. I feel very good about where we are, but we've got to face what did happen in this, in the court race and see why in the world, when we had such a large advantage in Democratic voters, were we not able to bring that over. And so we've got to solve those issues. We've got to solve those problems as to why those tickets were split. I think it was very clear as to where people lined up. I think it's interesting that we're talking about partisan versus nonpartisan, who wants and who doesn't. I think people want to make it tricky and make it clouded so that way voters don't know which way to go and who really represents their interests. And I think it's our responsibility as people in the party to be very clear about who does and who doesn't, and make that clear as we go forward, even in these statewide races.
And Ben, this could be, very likely will be, the last election cycle that we'll have under our current congressional maps and district maps. Legislators, in fact, in a couple of weeks are going back to redraw these for the 2028 cycle. How could Georgia look different then?
Well, I think that it could look very different, and particularly depending on the outcome of some of these runoff races, not just at the top of the ballot, but there are runoff races all over the state as well at lower level races. And so these folks are going to come to a special session. They're going to redraw legislative districts. They're going to redraw congressional districts. And now they have a new mandate where partisan gerrymandering is really the order of the day, and cracking rather than packing, as we used to do with majority-minority districts. You're going to see them cracking those districts open. And that could result in some surprising results potentially. We just don't know yet, but there could be a lot more competitiveness potentially. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Well, what do you expect to see, Jason, when we look at these new maps once they're drawn? Obviously, we don't know exactly how they're going to look, but we're hearing a lot of concern from the Democrats that there are not going to be as many minority representatives in Washington to represent the voices of Georgia voters. Is that a legitimate concern?
I don't think so, simply for the fact that Lucy McBath, when she was reelected before these new maps, was elected in a majority white district. And we're seeing more and more. I mean, especially we look at the U.S. Senate seat with Raphael Warnock and his reelection 2 years ago. And voters are not looking at race. They're looking at, does this candidate fit who I want to represent me? And it's not 1964's election anymore. It's 2026. And on both sides of the aisle, minority candidates are making strong gains, and they're not being voted on and elected by people who look at it like them, but by people who think the same way they do.
We're going to be talking a lot about this in the coming weeks, but we're going to head to a break now. Next on the record, one of the largest investments in Atlanta ever, Mayor Dickens' new plan for billions of dollars in upgrades to the city.
Welcome back. This morning, Atlanta leaders are considering Mayor Andre Dickens' new master plan to pour more resources into some of the city's underserved communities on the south and west side.
He's calling it the Neighborhood Reinvestment Initiative, and the plan is to extend 6 tax allocation districts, or TADs, for 30 years. Initially, the mayor called to extend 8 of those TADs. The money would be pulled from some of the property tax dollars meant for Atlanta Public Schools and for Fulton County. It would go towards projects like affordable housing, infrastructure, economic development, and transit. Mayor Dickens addressed City Council about that plan last week.
Every dollar deployed through a TAD, every trust fund grant and every publicly supported project in an NRI neighborhood must now demonstrate a direct connection to one of three outcomes. 1, preventing displacement. 2, stabilizing neighborhoods. And 3, creating wealth for residents.
City Council could vote on the plan as soon as next week. Then it heads to the APS School Board and Fulton County Commission for final approval.
Straight ahead on the record, state leaders pitching in to make sure our city is ready for action ahead of the World Cup.
And some unfinished business now sending Georgia voters back to the ballot box. Another round of runoffs is set for last week's midterm primary elections.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
This Sunday, Georgia voters are preparing to head back to the ballot box after a strong turnout during last week's primary midterm elections. We are glad you are with us. I'm Doug Reardon.
And I'm Rick Fulbaum. Nearly 2 million voters cast ballots in the primaries. It's a sign that Georgians are active, engaged, and dialed into the issues that matter to them. We asked voters why they showed up to the polls for this election.
I want to ensure that, my voice is heard.
I hope we see a lot more calmness.
You can tell that our power is important in a lot of the different things that they're trying to do in terms of redrawing the lines and that type of thing. If our power wasn't important, then these types of things wouldn't be happening.
Of the 2 million votes cast, about 1,090,000 of them were for Democratic candidates, according to data from the Secretary of State's office.
And those Democrats handed a decisive victory to former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms in the primary race for governor. She now hopes to become the nation's first black woman elected to a governorship. If elected, Bottoms would also become the first Atlanta mayor to ever ascend to the governor's mansion. Bottoms' opponent in the Democratic primary, many of them are now lining up behind her, pledging to support her in that all-important general election that includes former state senator Jason Estevez, who came in second to Bottoms on election night.
We have to make sure that Keisha is elected and that we stop Burt Jones and Rick Jackson in their tracks. We cannot continue the underinvestment in our communities and in our families like we've seen from Republican leadership for the last 20 years in the state. And the only way we turn that around is by helping Keisha Lance Bottoms get across the finish line in November.
Now, on the other side of the race, the Republican side, that is still very unsettled for governor.
Yeah, next month, Republican voters will decide between Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and billionaire healthcare executive Rick Jackson in their primary runoff for governor. The two candidates now go head-to-head June 16th after neither one secured a majority of the vote on election night. That runoff is expected to be another big test, not only for each of the candidates, but also for President Donald Trump, who endorsed Burt Jones early on in this race and has continued to reaffirm his support for the lieutenant governor, despite Rick Jackson's attempts to align himself with the president. During last week's primaries, 37 Trump-endorsed candidates won or advanced to runoffs in 4 different states across the country, including 8 Republican candidates in congressional races here in Georgia.
And several other statewide races are also headed to runoffs here in our state. In the District 3 race for Public Service Commissioner, Fitz Johnson and Brandon Martin are headed to a runoff. Now, if Johnson's name sounds familiar, it's because he served on the PSC for 5 years, and he is fighting to reclaim his seat after he was ousted in a special election last year. Whoever wins that race will face off against incumbent Commissioner Peter Hubbard. He's one of just 2 Democrats on that powerful 5-member panel that determines how much utility companies like Georgia Power can charge you for electricity, natural gas, telecommunication services.
And in the race for Georgia's Secretary of State, Republican Vernon Jones and State Representative Tim Fleming are on the June 16th ballot. And in the Democratic field for Secretary of State, also down to 2, Judge Penny Brown Reynolds and Fulton County Commissioner Dana Barrett are both hoping to take the reins of the office that's come under strict scrutiny when President Trump lost the state of Georgia in 2020, alleging widespread voter fraud.
And the crowded contest to become Georgia's second in command is also back on the ballot in June. On the Democratic side, it's State Senator Josh McLaurin and former State Senator Nabila Parks who will go head-to-head in the runoff for Lieutenant Governor next month. Similar scenario on the Republican side. State Senator Greg Dolezal and former State Senator John Kennedy will try to convince Republican voters that they're the best fit for Lieutenant Governor.
And let's welcome back our panel. Democratic political fundraiser, principal of Public Service Partners, Keisha Carter is here. So is former Cobb County GOP Chair Jason Shepard and political science professor and A&F political analyst Dr. Ben Taylor. Again, thanks for being here and going on the record. Keisha, let's start with you and we take a look at all of these results, and we've got a lot on our plate to look at, but how do you think Democrats are feeling? Here we are, we're almost a week away from the primary election. We've got a few weeks now till the runoff elections. We feeling good? What do you think?
I think we're feeling good. I think Democrats feel like we're in a great place here in Georgia. We know there's a lot of work to do. As great as turnout was in the primary elections, there were still a lot of people that stayed home. So we've got to go out and get them. We've got to do what we do best, knock on doors, make phone calls, do text messaging, do the postcards. We've got to do the whole thing in order to really win this state for the first time in 30 years. So we feel very good about where we are. We're confident even in the runoffs that we've got, and let those play out and let voters make those decisions. But at the end of the day, we're in a good place to really take back the state.
And Jason, same question. We don't have a runoff for governor in the Democratic side. We don't have a runoff for Senate. We have a lot of runoffs on the Republican side, certainly for these big races. How are candidates feeling? How are voters feeling about the enthusiasm going into the runoffs?
I think Republican voters feel the same way. We have to defend the state. We have to defend the great work that Brian Kemp has done over the past 8 years. And it gives the Republicans a little bit more time to really focus on who is the best person to be our nominees for all these different positions, whether it's governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. Senate. And there's a lot of work to do. I mean, Republicans are kind of used to the runoffs at this point, and we've seen them. In fact, 8 years ago, between Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle and Secretary of State Brian Kemp, that ended up in a runoff as well, where Brian Kemp placed second in the runoff. We were talking about the part of that 30%, and so did Jeff Duncan.
Yeah, that's right. And they both went on, of course, to win those races. Ben, let's talk about voter enthusiasm. We saw some of the turnout numbers, over 2 million. First of all, how is that compared to other years? Also, we saw that there were about 10% more Democratic ballots that were cast than Republican ballots that were cast in the primary. What does that tell you?
Well, I think starting with turnout overall itself, we had about 28% voter turnout. And while we would always like for there to be 100% voter turnout in any election, 28% turnout in a midterm primary is pretty robust, actually, based on historical patterns. And in terms of which side is showing more momentum, I think Keisha is correct that the Democrats are certainly more engaged in this point. And it's interesting because Georgia's an open primary state. We don't know what the link is between people selecting one party's ballot in a primary and their personal party identification. However, because it's an open primary state, you can see that as Democrats are casting more ballots, that means that there's probably more engagement because both parties had very active primaries up and down the ballot. And so more Democratic voters means more Democratic enthusiasm. And that's something that Republicans are going to have to work on going into the fall. Runoffs may help them with that potentially, but it also makes them spend a lot of money, and every minute you're not running for the general is a minute you cannot get back.
We should mention real fast that the way the rules work is if you cast a Democratic ballot on Tuesday night of last week, you've got to vote in the Democratic runoffs.
That's correct.
And if you cast a Republican ballot, you have to vote in the Republican runoffs. If you cast a nonpartisan ballot, which was also an option, you can vote for either. And if you didn't show up at all, you can show up and vote in the runoffs.
That's also, yes, correct.
Yeah, a lot to keep straight. But, Keisha, Ben just gave Democrats kind of the endorsement of the enthusiasm. We never know why people pull one ballot or another, right? So we can't say for sure. But can that momentum keep going through November, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think especially with the president in the White House, I think we get extra momentum every day. To be able to keep that going. And so for us, we know that this is a fight for our lives in a sense, and that Georgia really is on the ballot, and who we decide to be at the top of the ticket really mattered, and we've made that choice. And so now we've got to go fight for it. And everything that we have, making sure that every voter we can get gets to that poll. And I really think that all of the coalition building and things like that we've been doing will really start to show up over these next couple of months. And we have some time to kind of get into that a little bit sooner than our Republican opponents.
No runoffs to worry about.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Republican runoff. Of course, Keisha Lance Bottoms doesn't have to worry about it. She could sort of hang back and watch these two candidates, Burt Jones and Rick Jackson, go at each other for another few weeks. What do you expect to hear from them? How nasty is this going to get between now and the 16th?
I think it's going to get very nasty. We've already seen, and I've heard from a number of Republicans, just about how negative the race was going into this. And really, as I said before, these candidates need to differentiate themselves. They need to find something that's going to put them ahead of their opponent. And I think we'll see a lot of negative campaigning because that's designed to suppress your opponent's support. Make your opponent's supporters think again about going back out to the polls. In addition, we're going to be in June. There'll be a lot of Republican families. There'll be a lot of Democrat families on vacation. So we'll expect a much lower voter turnout. And once again, if you're one win a runoff, you have to lay everything out on the table. You can't hold anything back for the general. I've seen candidates over the years who've had that philosophy, and they didn't need to spend any money in the general because they weren't in it. So we should expect to see the serious candidates spend a lot of money.
Yeah, it's now or never. It's hard to imagine that race could get nastier than it is, but let's see what happens. And Ben, from a theoretical standpoint, right, not every state does the runoff system of elections. There have been whispers, maybe not even attempts really in Georgia to try and change that system, get rid of the runoff system. How would things look different for us if that were ever to happen? And, given that not every state does it, is there anything that makes Georgia unique in this way?
Yeah, Georgia is basically utterly unique in the way we use runoffs for general elections. About 14 other states use runoffs in primary elections, and then some states use ranked choice voting, which is a version of runoff. But the bottom line is Georgia did not have runoffs for a very short period of time in the late mid-90s where there was a threshold. You could get 45% of the vote and win, but that ended when Republicans took the legislature in 2005. They put the runoffs back in for all races at all levels, and there's reasons to suspect that's good. It makes sure that the candidates who win have achieved that majority threshold. On the other hand, it does cost more money. It's got, you've got to administer these elections. People have to get back out to vote. There's a lot of moving parts. And so there are, with everything, costs and benefits. But in the end, this is the system we've had for many, many decades, essentially. And I don't see it going away anytime soon. There doesn't seem to be an appetite to get rid of runoffs.
I certainly would agree with you there. It's a grind for candidates, a grind for voters, too. We'll still ahead on the record, the Democratic National Committee revealing what they think went wrong with that all-important 2024 election 2 years ago.
Also, blueberries, onions, and peaches all grown in Georgia.
Nothing's better than catching those peaches and pulling them right off the tree, putting one in your mouth.
Next on the record, a new push from our state's top agriculture official to buy local.
This Sunday, grocery prices, I'm sure you've noticed, are still climbing, but Georgia leaders are working to keep families fed and farms afloat.
Atlanta News First reporter Abby Kasouris has the story.
In this aisle, people aren't just browsing. They're doing math and making fast calls.
Prices are so high these days.
Claudette Dillard says she still looks for Georgia grown, especially Vidalia onions, a Georgia staple.
That's also more money, tax money for our state if we purchase things that are grown in the state.
Kroger calls it local makes sense. The point, make local easy to spot and easier to choose.
Nothing's better than catching those peaches and pulling them right off the tree, putting one in your mouth.
Oh yeah, your local's tagged. Yes, ma'am.
And today, the state's top ag official, Commissioner Tyler Harper, is here too, walking the store, snapping photos, and pushing the stakes beyond dinner tonight.
95% of our farms in our great state are family-owned operations. So when you buy Georgia grown, when you buy American grown, you're supporting a family down the street.
Families want lower prices now, but Harper warns drought, wildfires, and rising costs can shrink what farms produce, and that can push prices up later.
Farm families who pour their blood, sweat, and tears into this every single day.
And the price fight isn't just happening in Georgia. Politico reports President Donald Trump's plan to ease beef import tariffs is on hold after infighting, because imports could lower costs for shoppers, but undercut the cattle industry. Harper also warns imported products don't always face the same standards, and says Georgia farmers can't compete on an uneven playing field.
If they're not able to be successful and unfortunately they're not able to compete in the marketplace and we see them diminish or go away, that means we become more reliant on foreign sources of food.
Harper's argument is this: Georgia grown keeps food close, keeps farms alive, and gives shoppers confidence in what they're taking home.
I'm looking for things that I like to eat and things that are on sale.
Abby Kasouris, Atlanta News First.
And also this Sunday, the Democratic National Committee has released a critical study of the party's performance during the 2024 campaign.
It came after intense internal pressure from frustrated Democratic operatives who had publicly demanded the release of the post-election autopsy. The 192-page report, which was concluded last December, calls for a renewed focus on the voters of Middle America and the South, who have come to believe that they are not included in the Democratic vision of a stronger and more dynamic America for everyone.
All right, so the panel's back to weigh in on this now, and because, we're talking about Democrats, we'll start with you, Keisha. What was your takeaway from this autopsy, let's call it? And is any of this helpful going into the next election cycle for president?
Absolutely not. It was this was a waste of 192 pages. I mean, the push to release the autopsy, like something magical was going to come out of it. I think when we look back at the election, Democrats didn't necessarily do anything differently than we've done in multiple elections on the presidential stage. I think the hard fact that we have to realize is that it wasn't our message. It wasn't received from our messenger. And that's just the hard truth about it. We've had two very capable women run for president, and both times we come out with the same autopsy. We've got to realize that for whatever reason it exists, that they are not accepting this message from women, white or black, that are at the top of the ticket. And we've got to fix that and figure that out.
And there was really nothing in there about the selection of a new candidate anyway, so.
Jason, I remember back when Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama in 2012, and they came out, the Republicans did, with an autopsy as to what happened, what went wrong with the Romney campaign. Then Donald Trump came along. He didn't pay attention to anything in that autopsy, and he won. So what does it tell you about these autopsies?
I kind of like Keisha just said, they're not really worth the paper they're printed on. You can second guess everything, and most Republicans, when they looked at that autopsy, said basically the same thing. It's ignoring a lot of the key issues that were problems in that race, and not really addressing what a good candidate like Donald Trump or Joe Biden in 2020 was able to do, and that is get the message out to the voters. If the voters aren't hearing the message, or if the message is not responding well with the voters, or the candidate's not campaigning well in certain areas, and I think one of the key things was the simple fact that Vice President Harris was thrown into the position so late that she wasn't really able to get a base of support like Joe Biden had. It doesn't always translate. In fact, in American history, vice presidents rarely succeed their president in electoral victory.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And Ben, a lot of people would have skimmed this, right? You said you read it page 1 to page 92. So anything that you pulled out of this, and could it not maybe have been the best look for Democrats to release this and say, like, we really messed this up?
Well, they, in fairness to the DNC, they did say that. They just said this was our bad. We wanted this report, and it wasn't what we wanted actually, and so but here it is, and all of its problems. But I just want to push back just to touch on my fellow panelists that messenger. In national politics, and increasingly in American politics has been nationalized. So national factors, inflation, mood, consumer sentiment, gas prices, those things are affecting things that historically they didn't down the ballot, even in local races, and it certainly matters for presidential races. If you're running in an election like Vice President Harris was, where the national mood and just the general sense of voters was simply against you and what you had been associated with in the Biden administration, you were always going to have trouble. It didn't matter what your message was. And the same thing I think Republicans will find in this midterm election with President Trump.
Let's hope that none of us are the subjects of any autopsies anytime soon.
Yeah.
Coming up next on The Record, we are just weeks from the start of the FIFA World Cup, and Atlanta leaders are starting to roll out the welcome mat.
In just over 3 weeks, Atlanta will host its first of 8 World Cup matches, and the city is getting a major facelift.
It's true. Construction crews are making upgrades in downtown and roads all across town.
I don't think the mayor said enough about how many roads he's been paving around here. The First Lady told him the other day that she can now drink coffee and apply makeup on Moore's Mill. and many other roads. So we appreciate the cones, Mayor.
A lot of hard hats are in our city right now, Governor. A lot of roads being paved, a lot of buildings being built, and not only are World Cup attendees going to enjoy it, but Atlantans and Georgians are going to enjoy it.
Atlanta News First senior reporter Patrick Quinn explains while some of these changes are for the summer, others are here to stay.
26 days until the World Cup. Atlanta's pitch is starting to look the part. We watched as Cruz rolled a new banner onto the face of Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Downtown is back, Atlanta.
Mayor Andre Dickens, just a few blocks away, among those cutting the ribbon on what was a parking lot for the last 70 years, now a new park called Founders Green in South Downtown. Governor Brian Kemp credited the collaboration between state and local leaders with this park as an example in getting Atlanta ready to welcome the world.
Our unmatched blend of history, culture, Southern hospitality will certainly be on full display. And no area captures that spirit more than right here in the historic heart of the city of Atlanta.
Leaders of South Downtown Atlanta said this park is just the latest phase in their goal of making South Downtown the largest startup district in the U.S., with 11 new restaurants and food stalls opening before the World Cup. And a few blocks from here, we got an inside look at the Center, the former CNN Center, what will reopen to the public on Thursday, with food, beverage options for visiting soccer fans and Atlanta locals alike.
When the World Cup comes here in 26 days, the city will be alive. And this is a great reflection of how the community is preparing to welcome the world.
Dan Corso is the executive director of the Atlanta Sports Council. He told me FIFA officials are now in Atlanta, transitioning the stadium to be World Cup ready with natural grass being installed. Atlanta was just named the #1 town for sports business, and Corso said it's ready to welcome the crowds.
I can't speak for other cities, but I do know in talking with FIFA that Atlanta looks very well. It looks very good in regard to ticket sales. We expect capacity crowds inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
And that's our show. Thanks so much to our guests this week, Keisha Carter, Jason Shepard, and Dr. Ben Taylor.
And thank you as always for watching. We'll see you back here next Sunday.